Now let's talk for a little bit about a couple ways in which our beliefs are not quite rational according to the traditional definition. The first tendency that we see is that people are overly impacted by really low probability, really high profile events. This is what we call the law of small numbers. So what tends to happen here is that, say, a really big thing happens in the news, and suddenly people become convinced that this kind of thing is going to happen again in relatively short order. This is also something where this high profile doesn't necessarily mean that it's even in the news. It might just be something where I know somebody that this thing happened to. So, for example, it might be that I know someone who gets this very rare disease. Then suddenly I become convinced that I'm at a higher risk of getting the disease, even if scientifically I may not be. So some big examples of where this has happened would include, say, 9/11. After the terrorist attacks on 9/11, suddenly nobody wants to fly anymore, despite the fact that in all likelihood flying was actually safer after 9/11 than it was before 9/11, simply because we had increased security. So this is a case where we're very heavily impacted by low probability, but a very high profile event. Same thing happens, as I mentioned before, with anything happening to people we know. For example, if we know people that get in car accidents, suddenly we become more concerned that we ourselves are going to get into a car accident, even if, technically speaking, it doesn't make it any more likely. This also has a big impact on our insurance decisions, where often we will decide insurance based upon our experience and the experience of those close to us. So, for example, if I knew someone who dropped their smartphone, I become much more inclined to go ahead and pay for an extended warranty on it, even if financially it may not be the best deal. A second type of irrational belief is what we call overconfidence. Overconfidence is just what it sounds like. That is, people tend to have too much confidence in their own abilities, especially when we try to compare people to others. One experiment that they did in order to show this was they had two different rounds of a game. In the first round, you were allowed to, if you wanted to, you could pay this entry fee to enter into this contest. And in this contest, the winners were determined at random. Just, in effect, names were picked out of a hat, and a certain percentage of people were going to win. So say it's something like 10%. So if 100 people decide that they want to go ahead and enter this contest, then we'll pick 10 people, so you have a 10% chance of winning. So here you have a choice. You can either pay the money or not in order to join the contest. If you don't, you just keep your money. If you do decide to join, then you have a 10% chance of winning the prize. Then they ran the experiment again, but this time determining the winners not at random, but by having some game of skill. In this case, they did something like having people solve a puzzle, and the 10% that solved the puzzle the fastest were the ones that got prizes. Now what they wanted to study was, were people more willing to go ahead and pay some money for a 10% chance of winning a game of skill than this 10% random chance that we had in the first round. And in fact, that's exactly what they found, is that a lot of people believe that they are in the top 10%, which is in effect what you're saying if you're willing to pay the money to play the game of skill and have a 10% chance of winning, than if you are just putting in at random and having a 10% chance of winning. Examples where this shows up in our lives would be with investing. We tend to see overconfidence with investment quite a bit. This is especially true for people that are very educated. Traditionally, we might talk about doctors and how they make terrible investors, because we know that doctors are very educated people, very intelligent people, and there seems to be a belief that this intelligence transfers over to other categories of knowledge, but it doesn't. So we end up with people that are extremely confident, even though that confidence is not justified. This also happens with insurance, where just as the law of small numbers can make us believe overmuch that there's the possibility of bad things happening, overconfidence makes us believe overmuch that there isn't such a possibility. So for example, I might underestimate my own need for collision coverage for my car, because I'm convinced that I'm a better driver than I actually am. This also happens with overspending, where people will tend to say, well, I'll get things under control next year or next month, so it really doesn't matter if I spend more than I can afford right now. Really all this is saying you have a great confidence in your ability to get things under control in the future, where in all likelihood this confidence is misplaced. You probably shouldn't trust yourself that much.